Okay. I'll do it live. Okay. So, welcome to this tutorial Q&A experience for my Patreon patrons who want to know how I use Turnado. And we were just having this discussion before. I say a discussion, it was rather one-sided. It was me being like, why would anyone need a tutorial about Turnado? Isn't it obvious? And then I remembered that no, it's not obvious at all. It's quite a complex piece of software. It's just that I've got really used to it because as soon as it came out, I was like, oh my God, this answers all my problems. And my problems at the time, specifically in the context of the beardytron and, making live music out of beatboxing, not to mention my other problems in my life. It didn't solve any of them. But in terms of making music, the problems it solved for me were, well, computers aren't fast enough to do everything I want them to do. 12 years ago, they were not very fast at all compared to today's standards. Like multi-core computers were fairly new, and they overheated a lot. Like now we have Apple M1, which is this unified memory architecture and this all this system on chip stuff. It's very fast, very very fast. Using smaller and smaller node processors of the chip design, they're very fast. That was not the case 12 years ago. That is when um, Turnado came out, and I was bowled over by how cool it looked because I was already a fan of Sugar Bytes, who make Turnado. Sugar Bytes make a bunch of multi-effect stuff. Now they make all kinds of things, but they were a fairly new company back then. They had made Effects Tricks, which Effect Tricks, which was their, I think it was their first attempt at a multi-effect, and it is still good today. And I'm intending on putting that back into this rig at some point. But that was one of the first multi-effects I ever used. There were multi-effects for Windows. There was one in particular that I forget its name. Maybe someone can remind me. It's this old venerable multi-effect that a lot of these things are based on, where it was kind of one of the first of its kind. I remember the name of it. If I remember the name of it, it'll be there down on the screen when this is recorded. But yeah, that shows I should probably do some research and prep for these things. But either way, all of the multi-effects that have come since are kind of based on that kind of paradigm. You have a bunch of effect slots. The way that multi-effects tended to work, and indeed still tend to work, is that when you're designing a patch, that patch has its effect chain frozen. So you can't change it during runtime. And there are reasons why that is the case, because it's quite hard to program something where you can freely swap the order of the effects block. So maybe they've got implications about the kind of latency that they give and have to be compensated. It's just harder to code that. So generally speaking, multi-effects, and there's lots of them now, they all use this standard paradigm of here's a preset. You're not supposed to change it during runtime, as in during play time, when you're performing. During performance time, you're not supposed to change the order of the effects, and you're not really supposed to change presets. And that's become more and more true the more that over the years, Ableton has ceased to become a live first DAW and become more of a kind of copycat of all the other DAWs. That is to say, linear workflow, everything separated into channels. You're not, using this kind of combinatorial sort of spreadsheet is. I don't see people rocking up on stage with Ableton as much as I used to. When around 2010, 2011, I think was peak Ableton as DJ platform. I see less and less of that now. But at the time, Ableton was one of the only ways you could play with samples, and it was one of the only ways that you could be creative on stage. Nowadays, people tend not to try and be creative on stage. There was this sort of punk era of controllerism where there weren't even any controllers. You had to gut a MIDI keyboard and repurpose it, and Ableton was the only game in town. As that ceased to be the case, the plugins that do multi-effects are more for producers that are sitting on a chair in their studio and they're not interested in swapping out presets. So this is all a bit of an arse backwards way of saying, when Turnado came out, I've really gone off on an ADD one in this, but when Turnado came out, it was answering problems that many people had at the time, which is how do I perform with effects? So I suppose that is really what separates Turnado from all of the other multi-effect solutions out there, is how do I perform with it? And actually, to go back to what I was just saying about this reordering of the effects chain, Turnado does that. Turnado can reorder the effects chain. There's only one other thing that I've ever seen, one other plugin I've ever seen that does that, and that's Tim Exile's The Mouth. No, not The Mouth, sorry. The Finger plugin, which you can still buy, I think. It's a Native Instruments release. It's built in Reactor. But it does that too. And this is something that you would want, probably, if you are improvising live electronic music. And as I say, in 2010 or thereabouts, which is when Turnado was being developed, that was more of a thing, you know. So, like, I'm kind of an outlier still, that I kind of want to improvise electronic music from scratch with as few presets as possible. I just want presets to be sort of moving, dynamic, adaptable things, and that's what Turnado allows. So I suppose in this Q&A, I'm going to show how I use it, why it is that I can't escape its pull, because it still does things that nothing else is suited to, and that you have to put it in its kind of historical context of when it was made, and what I was trying to do with it at the time, and what I'm still trying to do with it now. So yeah, maybe that's enough preamble. I suppose I can just kind of now drift into showing you some of the things that I use it for. But I need to preface that by just stating from the outset that I am actively trying to move away from Turnado as much as possible, because Turnado is very limited in many respects. Like, the things that make it good also make it bad. So the things that are good about Turnado are computers being that much slower in 2010, 11, whenever it was that it came out, meant that for this multi-effect plugin to be good, it needed to be very CPU efficient. But there's a trade-off that comes with that. It can't be too complex. It can't be too powerful. It can't be asking the CPU to do too much. So the quality ends up suffering. But that said, for things like reverbs and distortions, you can still get amazing results out of it if you're creative with it. And the thing that makes it very easy to use and easy to program patches for, similarly, also holds it back a bit. So it's amazing for modulation. It's got features that nothing else has, like this dictator. And the dictator is this idea that they had. And I'll just show you it. I'll just start showing you. So, okay, so this is my melodic group. This is just melodic stuff excluding the drums. In that, I have bass loopers. That's just their Augustus loop. You don't need to see that. We're not discussing that today. That's another nightmarish explainer video. That's like, yeah, Augustus loop is a whole science. But like, yeah, bass FX is where that chains into. And this is where we have Turnado. And yeah, quite pointedly, I don't have anything else in here really. Like, I had some multiband dynamics, which I'm not even using. They're just in there because I didn't have the heart to delete them. But yeah, this multiband dynamics thing is just Ableton's stock multiband thing. I was just using that to kind of control levels. But I'm trying in this rig all the time to get rid of stuff. Like, the more you can purge, the better. Because I've got this running at 128 samples of throughput latency, and I've taken the latency compensation off, which means that, like, it has to be performance. It has to be really performant, and nothing is allowed to add any latency, which is another good thing about Turnado. But there you go. So there's nothing else on this channel really. There's an EQ8. That's Ableton's EQ. I'm just using that for like basic filtering of like high pass. I think it's just high pass in this case. But yeah, here's Turnado. It is all I've got in the bass track. That is actually no longer true at all. It is still true in the context of that particular bass FX channel, which all my bass loopers go through. But in the context of what I'm doing now, trying to move away from it, this crazy thing here, this is now an insanely complex effect chain. It's got plugins. It's got Infiltrator, which is another like competing multi-effect that only came out like 3 years ago or something, but it is mad. It can do stuff that Turnado couldn't dream of doing, but it isn't as performant, and they only put in preset switching very recently. And Turnado is able to switch presets very trivially. You just send it bank changes, and it's been able to do this since like 2011 or something. You send it bank changes, and it switches like that. There's no CPU hit, there's no clicks, nothing. And nothing in Turnado adds any latency. In Infiltrator, that's got multiple quality modes and latency settings. To my knowledge, all of those were put in because I refused to put it in my rig, and the guys at TVS Machines that make Infiltrator were like, "Oh, well, I guess we need to put in these performance options so it can be really performant for live performance." So people aren't thinking as much about live performance for a DAW as they used to. That's just something I keep banging my head against. But people are willing to kind of do it. I'm trying to bring back using a DAW as a live performance instrument, but here you go. So yeah, Infiltrator. This is not Infiltrator. This is Touch OSC, which is an interface builder, and these it's a bit blurry as well. But essentially, these are just controls which are controlling these things, which is why I'm pointing at them. This is Supermodal controls for Supermodal by Polyverse. There's another instance of Turnado where I am using the dictator. I'm not in this one I'm about to show you. This is a crazy modulation system of my own design, which is using Modulat, which is an insane kind of modular signal routing environment for use in Ableton that kind of jacks all of Ableton's best bits and puts them into this user-friendly kind of panel where you can do this kind of node-based programming in a way that you always should have been able to with Ableton Max for Live. Another topic again for another day. Rift and Valhalla Ubermod, Valhalla Freak Echo. These are amazing plugins, and that is now my bass effect chain. Because as I say, because I've known Turnado inside out for like over a decade and had a hand in making some of its features, I'm trying to move away from it because of its restrictions and because computers are now so much faster that I'm able to have like crazy fucking spectral shit and just mad shit that is amazing, and I wasn't able to have in like 2011 or whatever. So back to 2011 kind of thing. Here's Turnado. And to emphasize, Turnado is so CPU efficient that even in 2011's computers, you could just run 20 of them or something in a rig, and it just wouldn't matter. There was seemingly like no CPU hit. So I will show you now some of what I mean when I say that Turnado is both good and bad. Yeah, I was going to show you the dictator, wasn't I? So this is Turnado. To try and summarize what you're looking at when you boot up Turnado. For the uninitiated, this stuff down here is your little library of objects that you can instantiate in Turnado. And if you need disambiguation about what that means, these are little toys you can play with. And within each of these, you can have different presets. So you can click one and drag it. I won't do that because it'll ruin this preset here, but like, yeah, looper, pitch looper, pan looper. These are all fun little things that have their own benefits and restrictions and stuff like that. So which one am I going to show you? I can show you any of them. I suppose an easy one to show you first is the levelizer. So this is a bit crusher, essentially, but you can also use it for just like gating. And I'll try and take you through what this does. But no, first I will show you the dictator because I said I was going to. But to understand what the dictator does, for some context, you need to see inside these first. So this is the dictator. I'm not using it at the moment. And the reason why is because in the beardytron that I was building in 2011, 2012, that was built from the ground up in C++. I have only just started like learning C++ now. Like then, I wasn't a coder at all. I'd done like pretty much no coding other than like playing around with fucking, Amstrads when I was a kid. So like the idea of having like a modular effects environment that was all based in one VST was incredibly appealing to me. And the fact that you could kind of, pile these up as need be was great. And the fact that you could change these presets here with bank changes and that there was no click, nothing, no CPU hit, that's fucking amazing. That's still amazing now. And it still is quite rare because, as I say, people aren't thinking about how to perform live with a DAW, with a DAW. They're just like, you're going to be sitting in your studio. You're probably going to download a sample pack. And there were no download sample pack things 10 years ago. Showing my age, but like that's when I started making the various different versions of the beardytron. It's before there were sample packs. Like I nearly stopped this whole live improvisation project thing entirely when all these like online downloadable sample pack sites started to emerge, and I was like, why am I bothering? Like you can make a tune very quickly just by like cobbling some shit together. I even did a tune at one point where the mission was like, see how far you can get just by following your first instinct in a sample library instead of just, producing it live. And it made this extremely weird tune. Very weird. It's one of the weirdest things I've ever made. I didn't love it. It was quite cool in the way. But like, either way, that is the paradigm of today in the main that I am keen to shift back to my dream of freestyle flow, which people like Harry Mack and Mark Rebier, they share this dream of like, and Ari at home, and there's other people as well. Like, improvise. Don't sit in your chair and download other people's work and do a jigsaw. See what comes out of you. Like that for me, it's that investigative, explorative, latent space that is worth exploring, that excites me about music making. I'm not really fussed about discovering other people's samples as much. That feels like this kind of mercenary kind of, okay, well, I guess I'll make a tune then. It's just not as much fun. It's just not as much fun. So anyway, yeah, in the context of that and endless experimentation, Turnado is very good, especially considering what this dictator can do. And I'll show you what it can do very quickly. Then I'll show you what happens inside one of these modules. And then I'll show you how that relates to this dictator. And some of the quirks that make it really good for improvising music. And then some of the reasons why I'm trying to move away from it and do things which are better, because I've been banging up against these limitations for like a decade. And it's only with faster computers that I've been able to escape it. But, so the dictator is just a fucking fader. It's just a fucking fader. But there is this grid of little doodahs. So you can like paint these automation lanes, and that's kind of what they are. You're painting these kind of one-dimensional automation lanes. So if, as you can see, if you're doing that, you're cruising, through this kind of one-dimensional automation lane, and you can imagine the kind of the opacity of these lanes, which relates to the value of one of these knobs. You can see the opacity kind of went to 100 there. That's what that's doing, and it's a really nice way of showing it, because like in an automation lane, classically in Ableton, for example, or any other DAW, it's a sort of XY graph, and you've got your Y is your value, X is your time, and then the relationship between them, that transformation dictates what the parameter is going to do. And I don't know, I've never seen anything like this, really. And especially in the context of the fact that you can change the order of the effects really trivially by just turning them on and off. So there is a mode here, dynamic signal flow. So if you have that checked, I mean, and you can have it per preset or for the entire instance of Turnado. If you have it per preset, then you switch to another preset, and dynamic signal flow, which is this thing where you can reorganize the signal chain in real time, gets turned off, which is useful for some presets and not as useful for others. They've really thought that through. That's really good. But yeah, so to try and explain what's going on there, like they called it the dictator because it kind of just dictates all the levels of those knobs. That's very cool, and I'll show you what it does in a minute, and I'll explain why I don't use it at this point in my rig, why I may start, well, I am already using it again in another instance of this, why I had to stop using it, why I was using it. But yeah, as you can see, you're tracking through a one-dimensional automation forest there. You've got multiple lanes of automation, and you can sort of do it by feel. So I don't want to sort of get distracted yet by putting noise through this, but just so you understand the principles of it. Yeah, it's not that complicated. It's like if you've ever seen an automation lane in a DAW, time is tracked on the x-axis. With this, user control is doing what time would do in an automation lane. So like, yeah, simple enough, you get the principle. But that can be very powerful if you want one preset to do one thing in one or other direction. So you kind of have this ability to have a journey that gets taken in terms of what the effects are doing in one direction. And then because you're able to, like any of these knobs, if it's like this one, for example, they call it a slice arranger. So it's just like taking slices of incoming audio and then it's reordering them. And I'll go into more detail about this in a minute. But you're not, I mean, you're able to like capture a piece of audio because as soon as that knob is up, this is then engaged. This little algorithm, this slice arranger, it's taken like a bar or 2 bars of audio, depending on the setting you've got there, and it's going to start rearranging the chunks according to which pattern is denoted in this control here, and they're set patterns. And again, I'll get into more of this in a minute. But what you can do is, you know, move the dictator out of the range of that automation lane. You can see there that the knob went off. If you go back into it, you'll grab another piece of audio. So you can just do that and you keep grabbing new bars of audio. What you can also do is you can have this other preset here. So I've got the vinylizer, and I'll show you this in a minute. Maybe I should start showing you now. Put some audio in. But like, yeah, you're changing the order of the effects, not by telling, discreetly telling it, like, I mean, absolutely dictating on like a graph somewhere, like what order the effects should be in, but you're setting up the conditions under which effects will come on and off, and that then leads to them being rearranged. Maybe I should just show you. It'll be much easier to understand if I'm just showing you. So hopefully this will work. Let's see. So I'm going to put in a noise. So, right, so I put in little raspberry bass. Not much going for it. So we can make it a bit funkier. Well, that wasn't very good. To be honest, I don't use the dictator at the moment, and here's why. It's because So in the 2011 Beardytron, I exclusively used the dictator because it suited me to have these tiny little faders which would do all this mad shit. But what I found was, and I'll go into this more in a sec, but I found that just having one automation lane per preset was quite limiting, because then you can only do things like up in the up direction, or you can land at a particular point and do something from there. But you have to jump from one position to another. That's still cool because you can get all these different combinations, but there's only, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, was it like 20 or something different positions on here where you can actually land a marker, and then the interpolation is enacted between those markers. So you basically have, and also you have to kind of double them up, because if you want to make like a standalone marker here, then you have to kind of do this. I don't know if you can see, but yeah. If you want to have a little standalone bit where you know that you're going to cut in and out, and you're going to let audio into one bit, let it into another. So if it's a sampler, for example, and you want to go boop and start chopping the audio up and then release it, go in the other side, maybe on a different setting, so maybe it starts lower. So I don't know if you can see that happening or that happening. So that goes up from 0, or you can do the other side. It goes to there, jumps to it, that kind of thing. But whatever, you've only got 4 of these little markers that you can use. You have a minimum of 4 markers that you can use. So if you want to have a little journey there for a knob, you're going to be using up like a sort of a fifth of your space. So these are the kind of reasons why Turnado falls down a bit if you're trying to use it as like an all-purpose multi-effect solution, which I was in 2011. But as I say, I'm moving away from that. That's a whole nother discussion about like the new shit that I'm doing. And anyone who's been watching me like trying to develop shit over the last couple of years, you'll see how hard I'm trying to work at replacing Turnado, but I still can't get rid of it. And here's why. So let me show you. So we've got our little bass line in there. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this and start it from scratch. So let's use the dictator. So I'll just let's imagine that we want to have at the top of this thing maximum distortion and at the bottom of it minimum distortion. So now we just go. Do you know what? That's not easy to hear. I'll show you. Right, let me do something that's easier to hear the distortion. That should be easier to hear the distortion now. That's just a sine wave bass. There you go. So now you're like, okay, well, that's cool, but I'd quite like to modulate that a bit. It doesn't feel modulate-y enough. I'm going to ruin this preset, and I'm just going to like sacrifice this and like reload from where it was before. But essentially, let's say I want to modulate it. I go like, let's say that. So I don't know if you can see this, but what you're doing there is, right, so now what I'm telling Turnado to do is, if you're imagining it as a kind of scripting environment, for this central knob, change the extent of this drive parameter according to this LFO, which is a saw down, at a rate of 1/8 of a bar with no multiplier on that rate. There's like a time multiplier option with the phase set to 0, so it's always going to be locked to the host. And in fact, you can make it a one shot, so it just does it once. You can just set it so that it's set to relative to when you actually raised that knob in the first place. I've got it set to host sync, so it's always going to be in time with the Ableton set, which is what I've got across all of them. Really, depending on the use case, the effects. Generally, I use host and sync, but it depends. But yeah, so and all of that happens via this multiplier here, which is to say this knob dictates the amount and the curve through which this LFO will be expressed to there. So as you're just building a little equation, and it is pretty cool. But there are some things it can't do, and yeah, I'm still working hard to get around these things. And there's some stuff in the works that I'm doing which kind of takes this sort of modularity and takes it to like where it should naturally go next. But that's another conversation for another day. But yeah, so that is how Turnado works. You've got LFOs, you've got LFO1, LFO2, and then you've got this envelope follower, which is taking the sound level in and then generating an envelope based off of that with an attack and a release and an amount. And then you can, again, define the amount that any of these things affect, any of these actual effect parameters, of which there are always 4 and only 4 in any given effect block. And then you've got a variety of settings which are per preset locks and are not real-time changeable, which is another thing about Turnado which is annoying, that you can't change those in real time, because you can change the presets in real time, but if you change the preset, then you're either going to need to have like presets which are kind of cousins of each other, which are kind of built to live alongside each other, so that you can change those kind of parameters, which is something I could have done, maybe should have done, and I still haven't done. But that could be a strategy. So like, for example, you've got normal, soft limit, hard limit, evil limit. So these are like, and they put those in at my request actually. Before it was just, they didn't have any modes for this. It was just like drive. And then I was like, well, this drive actually does increase the gain so much that it's unusable. So then they put in this like gain knob here, which again, you can't vary that with any of these LFOs. You just have to set that per parameter. Per preset. for the particular effect block. And there's another annoying thing about Turnado, which just winds me up, which is that, I mean, it's amazing that you have all of this, because this kind of ease of use is rare to find, especially because it's so central to how it works, and it's so kind of easy to get your head around once you've thought about what you want to do. You're like, okay, well, I want distortion. I want it to do fun shit. But you can't change that curve to anything other than these built-in things. You've got sine. You can change the phase, but you can't change the phase within Turnado. You can't map that phase to anything. That would be useful. And there are artifacts when you change it. It's not smoothed. So those are the limits of this thing. It's like, you've got to watch the limits. I don't know if you can hear that artifacting, but the phase is not designed to be moved around. There's no sort of interpolation going on there anywhere. There's no smoothing. You know, so you can't use it for that purpose. There's some other effects within Turnado that you can't use in certain ways for that reason, because they haven't built interpolation into it or smoothing of any kind. But we'll go through those. So yeah, in the bass channel, do I use that? No. So I've kind of got. Well, I'll show you what I've got. Okay, well, tell you what. This is my bass channel Turnado. I'm going to show you what would happen if you really wanted to use the dictator. I don't at the moment, and that's because you only have one-dimensional direction of travel, but you increase your degrees of freedom if you just have direct access to these 8 knobs. And after a whole bunch of time, I realized that it's just better to have 8 degrees of freedom, and then you have, like, I mean, what is it? What is that in maths? How many different combinations? Because it's like, here you have like 128 different, well, 128 if you're using MIDI, but yeah, 128 different positions, which are always doing the exact same thing. That's 128, but they have to kind of smoothly move between each other, or you've got to have a block of 4 of them or something. But if you're moving, this is what I do at the moment, you're moving these knobs individually, you can then have fucking, what is it, 128 times 128 times 128 times 128. Like, vastly, vastly more combinations. And of course, it's kind of ends up being sort of less than that in practicality, but like, you see what I'm getting at. So that's how I do it currently. So on the Beardytron as it is at the moment, there's no dictators being used anywhere. And on the one I was making in 2011, I was solely using these dictators. And now I'm like, well, fuck it. I'll just have more iPads and I'll have more dictators. So each of these is a knob. Sorry, I just garbled my way through a sentence and didn't make sense. I just said I'll have more iPads and just more knobs. So this is on, oh, you can't see my mouse, can you? I need to point. Here, there are just, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 knobs. They are distortion, reactor, arranger, flange, beat repeat, 4x4, filter, redux, and reverb. So that, what I just pointed to, that was my drum channel. I'm showing you my bass channel, so let's go through what I've got on the bass. I've got pattern, gapper, beat repeat, bit, dist, pitch, and then I've got this LFO thing. So I'll take you through what those are, because I had a specific request to show that stuff. So here we are on the bass looper. I've sort of shown what the dictator is able to do. I'll just quickly finish that explanation of what you're able to do with the dictator, and then go into how I actually use it. So we're trying to make something cool. It's going wow, 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 wow. That's cool. Maybe you want the vinylizer to come in at the top. Now, the vinylizer, well, I'll tell you why I have the vinylizer in particular. So I'll need to put a different thing into there. So if I go okay, so that's actually probably a good thing to show. Yeah, let's build a little dictator layout for this, because I mean, again, like I say, I don't use a dictator at this part of the rig, because I like having the freedom of these separate knobs. But in my old rig, I did, and the kind of things I do, I'd be like, okay, I want to put my voice in, just go la dee dee bang be dung dung. Let's do that. La dee be dung be dung bang. So what this vinylizer is going to do, and this vinylizer is a cool thing because it's got several modes. Manual mode, which actually just pitches down segments, like a sort of shit pitch changer, but very musically useful if you use it right, because it actually has no artifacts other than time synced artifacts on the on this size parameter. So here it's every 16th, which I found to be kind of useful. And in manual mode, it's just going to literally just pitch down those segments. So you can hear the artifacting, but that's pitching down a fifth. Sorry, I think it was pitching down a fourth. It would be pitched up a fifth. Anyway, that's an octave. That's 2 octaves. So let's give that a lane. Let's say I want it to just cut in. Let's.
You can see decoder.
Oh shit! Sorry. Here we go. There you go. Right. So let's say we want the vinylizer to start pitching the voice down specifically 1 octave, specifically at this particular point here. So let's say that you move the dictator and you just want it immediately to do it. So I need to make sure that this dictator opacity is the same. And as you can hear, that guitar amp that I was just playing with there, this one that we were just looking at before, the drive module, that comes after it in the signal chain. Not because you've told it to, but because in terms of the time when you did each, that one comes on first, and then that one comes on. And we've got dynamic signal flow instantiated. So, yeah, if you wanted to do this another way, you could map the crossfade between wet and dry, which I do on lots of these other Turnado instances. You could map that to there as well. So what you could do with this vinylizer is you could say, I mean, to be honest, this is what I would do if I was making this. So what I'd want. So what I want to do is I want this to be a smooth transition. So this is not set up to do a smooth transition. You can't do that. So let's make that possible. So what I just did there was I went into the vinylizer block and I told the crossfade to admit of a proportional relationship between the knob and the output parameter here. So yeah, you move that that knob up to maximum and make sure it's got a linear curve on it. But maybe I don't want that. Maybe I would like this knob, when you start turning it, to quite quickly get rid of the wet signal entirely. So you can do that with one of these curves. And again, this is one of the disadvantages and advantages of Turnado. Very easy to get to select these curves. There's only a discrete set of them. Was it 20 curves? But you better hope that the thing you want to do falls within the curves provided, because you can't edit them. There's no user curves, which is just annoying. But again, in 2011, beggars couldn't be choosers, and this was, it's still useful, still. So, okay. So what we've got now is we've got this, this knob turned up to maximum. So again, you can vary how much this knob transfers the movement of your main knob to this destination parameter here. I'm going to put it up to maximum, and I'm going to make it so that because of this spline here, you can basically start moving the knob, and very quickly that knob gets set to maximum. So what that sounds like is. So the thing is, with a preset, you've got to decide what it's going to do every time it happens. So again, that's a good thing if you're happy just to have the same journey every time with the dictator. It's like, okay, well, this preset is designed for this specific part of this song, let's say, or this preset is designed for one specific use case where I want to bring in this vinylizer thing, which is basically a kind of thing you can use to either do a kind of shitty version of scratching like vinyl, or it's like a vinyl stop. It's good at that. The vinyl scratching thing is kind of dodgy, and I'll go into that in a sec. But like this vinylizer is good for pitching things down. I don't use it that often at this point. I've got other things to do that. But like to be able to pitch something down with minimal CPU hit is still useful to this day, because pitch shifting often introduces latency. It always introduces artifacts, and the only way for it to introduce like as few artifacts as possible is by increasing the latency and doing a really complex algorithm like phase vocoding or something like that. So this is fine for what it is. You just have to deal with the artifacts that happen on the beat, and the fact that like, if you do anything within a 16th, then that thing within a 16th will either fall outside of the 16th and not be heard, or it will be kind of shifted. So if you do something which has sort of very little musical detail in it and the notes are quite long, this is a perfectly good way of doing it. But is that what we want? Not really. I don't think we want to do what it's currently doing. I will show you what it's currently doing, and then I will delete it, and then I will delete this whole project file and just go back to what it was before. But just for the sake of the pedagogy, I figured out something rather cool with Turnado, which is a nice little hack that I use all throughout my implementations of it in the rig. So forgetting this for a second, we'll go back to building our dictator patch in a sec. But like, this is very cool. So this is how I use the vinylizer at the moment. Let's undo that. Let's just put this so it's always at, so as soon as you turn this knob, immediately the block is engaged and you're at 100% wet. So I figured out that you can use some of these curves here for some really cool things. And I say figured out, that's what it's meant for. But like, it can be very useful. So for example, if this thing here, this curve which is shown, was not 3 steps, but just a sort of a line, this is what you'd get. Which is nice, but that's not what I want. I want to have something more musically useful, like this. So I want to define those steps. So, so there's a couple of ways to do this in Turnado. Luckily, the way that this is set up, using this like 3-step spline here, and I say luckily because there aren't that many of these, like I said, but using this 3-step spline here, turning this dial means that that parameter value gets transformed down to these discrete steps, which goes down like down a fourth, and then down an octave, and then down 2 octaves, which is kind of just lucky that it does that, but it's kind of just maths, really. So yeah, that's fine. That's good. But there's another way to do it if you need to design your own discrete steps, and I'll show you that in a minute, but essentially it involves taking a step sequencer, and here you can define your own discrete steps that you wish this to take, and the way you do that is by putting that to a linear relationship, and then you define the movement of, sorry, I think you disengage that. Do you disengage that entirely? No. Yeah. So what you do is you would... Oh, no, sorry, yeah. No, you would disengage that entirely. So, yeah, sorry. I use this all the time, but I rarely think about what the fuck I'm doing. So, yeah, do you know what? Now I come to think of it, this isn't all one system, it's two discrete systems. So you've got this knob here, which defines how this knob is going to move in relation to the main knob. But you've got this other separate system, which kind of, I mean, all these things add to each other like a modulation matrix. But using this step sequencer, you can kind of disregard that transformation knob entirely. And what you would do is you would put that to positive, like the switch that dictates the relationship between an LFO and its destination parameter. And it can be positive or it can be negative, so it's either plussing or minusing. And then you would put this into one-shot mode. And actually, you would take the rate down to off. So then what you're going to do is that turning this knob, you want that to alter the phase of this step sequencer. So if you can see there, I put the phase knob down to 0 and then its modifier up to 1 and give it a linear relationship. So what you now have is the ability to turn the knob, and I don't know if you can see, but this slowdown knob is now tracking through the values that you've set in the step sequencer, which is a really cool thing. And like I said, I haven't used it in this finalizer patch here, but I use that a lot because it's a really good way of being able to define your own values for these things. So it's a way of getting a bit more kind of user-defined behavior out of Turnado. That really is a kind of advanced hack if you're new to Turnado. But once you know it, and then you can use it any way you want. So you'd be like, oh, these discrete values provided in this curve aren't doing it for me. What if I just do this? Turn off the rate, change the phase, and then it steps through these. But it's not perfect. Sometimes it's a bit buggy, like because it's not. I don't think it was meant to do that necessarily, or at least it's not perfect. So you'll be sometimes it goes out of phase a tiny bit. It's never been annoying enough that that I've had to sort of mount a QA ticket, but just something to be aware of. Like sometimes it gets which step it's on slightly wrong, but it's just a sort of temporary thing. You can just go like that and it gets it right again. But yeah, so I'll show you that in some of these. You'll see that in some of these others that I'll show you. But for now, I think undo, and go back to where we were. Which is another great thing, actually. It's got this infinite undo. It's really fucking cool, which is separate to live's undo, which is great because often an undo step in live, a badly designed Max for Live object will sometimes give you... a badly designed Max for Live device will sometimes generate fuckloads of undo steps, and then you're fucked. In fact, VSTs sometimes do that. So you've got to be careful. But like, yeah, where were we? So we've got our vinilizer. Let's see where we're at. Oh, God damn it. See, now I've got to design it from scratch. Or maybe this is good. That's where it was, okay. Okay, so we are just going to... We're going to get rid of that. We're going to set this. Set it to 25, which happens to be 2 octaves down. And then we are going to give this relationship where it kind of has a linear relationship between the knob and the wet dry. I was on the wrong one. Do you know what? I think it's about doing it by ear, I suppose. So you just got to figure out what it is you want. So with this finalizer thing, oh, by the way, you can lock that so that no changes that you do here affect these automation lanes, which is probably a good idea to do. And they put that in, I think, at my request as well, because I was finding that these were always... Yeah, I wanted to use these at the same time as the dictator, and that was... They put that lock in for me. I wonder if you can change dictator presets on the fly. I imagine you can. Does that mean you can have multiple dictator presets for a given preset? Had I never considered that before? Had I never even looked at that? That's an interesting strategy. Ooh. Like, oh yeah, I'm an expert at this. In 11 years, haven't tried to change it, but actually, I think there might be a way to change dictator presets on the fly. So I think you can have like you
yeah.
can't you? So yeah.
I mean, I've been able to from bespoke, like it exposes the dictator thing. So I think there's a way of sending a message to it, but I'm not sure if it's native.
I think it's
But there is in the VST spec. There is. So
yeah, I think it's bank change. I think it's bank changes. I think would do that. I think there's like a separate. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. But if it's possible to change these remotely, then that's a really interesting way of getting some variation. But that still can't change. It would be good if you could swap out these blocks, but you can't. Like, I mean, you can, not during like playtime, not in performance time. As in, you'd need to change the whole preset to do that. Anyway, I mean, it's got these nice randomization options, but again, that's just for like creative play during patch building. Either way, what are we trying to do? I'm going to change that to linear. So it's like, but I want that to complete its journey. There. Guitar out's a bit loud. I can put it onto soft limit mode. Not quite as evil one. Now, it would be good if you could have multiple dictators for these. A hack that you can use if you want to do that, to have multiple dictators, is you can have upwind of this, you can have another Turnado instance, and you can have that Turnado spit out MIDI to then put out of Ableton and back in and capture it here, or you could use a Max for Live device to do that. That would be dope, because then you can have multiple dictators. You can't have multiple dictators. You can only have one dictator run, so it is a one-dimensional parameter transformer. So yeah, I mean, that would be my preference. But what you can do is you can just lock that shit, and then you don't have to attach these to the dictator. So you can be like, now, the cool thing about this fucking Turnado doodah, and I think this will work without ruining everything. I think. Let's see. As if I do. No. Can you detach these entirely from the dictator? I don't think you can. I don't think you can. This is the thing. I don't use Turnado that much for really deep stuff anymore. Like in 2011, 2012, it was all I used. But I think one of the reasons why I've been trying to escape it is because it does stuff like that. So like it would be good if you could have that dictator do stuff, but like have these just be completely detached from the dictator. But I don't think there's a way. Like here, these buttons change between which thing you're viewing in the GUI, which block you're viewing. No, there is no way. You can't choose a preset to not be included in the dictator. That's annoying. Because that would be good, right? That you've got the dictator and then there's like something else. But then, yeah.
I don't want to give you ideas in the middle of a tutorial, but like imagine if there was an A dictator and a B dictator.
No, I know.
Like it was,
I've dreamt of
like it
such
was
a
some
thing.
kind of DJ deck thing.
Yeah, I've dreamt of
Like,
such a
that you
thing.
could just pick.
I know, but like there isn't. And like here, hang on. Reset after load, FX off at knob full on, dynamic display, CC recall lock, keep bypass state. No, none of those things. I can go through those and explain them if you like, but like none of those things relate to what I'm wanting here. And again, I could contact Robert at Sugarbytes and beg for this feature, and he probably put it in.
Can I ask a stupid question?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the signal chain, this is basically interrupting, right? It doesn't feed in. It's you're passing through Tornado. There's an in and there's an out, and that's how that works, right?
It's in series, yes.
So why not have two of them?
Well, I do.
That should be able to do.
I do,
Oh, okay.
but then you sacrifice this dynamic signal flow thing. So what I was trying to show you just then, before suddenly realizing another drawback of Turnado, is that like a really cool thing is, and this is why I don't use the dictator anymore, is so that I can do shit like this. Okay, so with the dictator, you can't freely decide on which order these things happen in, other than with the dictator. I could and should ask him to have a little check mark in each of these knobs that's like exclude from dictator or detach from dictator. But like, anyway, so what I do now is I do this. So I'll show you. So you got that, and then you go like, fuck it. I'll give you a better example. Hang on, here we go. Okay, so that is using this slice arranger thing on pattern number 3 in normal mode, and they've just got a bunch of these other modes, which are all pretty much the same functionally, but with different patterns. Apart from this one here, which is called re-record, which takes audio in at the beginning of every phrase. Which is another useful thing if you want it to capture the chord changes of the thing that it's processing, rather than just capture it and keep shuffling it. That's great. Another disadvantage of this, while we're talking about it, is that if you change the pattern, it doesn't do that in a DAW phase locked way. So you will often, and this is a complaint that I hear from people, and it's one that I have myself, is that it's very easy to get really garbled, out of time, like weird unphase locked patterns, and it's annoying. And the only way around it is to make sure that you switch to the next pattern exactly on the beat. Turnado doesn't have a way of doing that. The only ways that you can do that is by turning this thing off and on again. So turn the slicer knob to 0 and then back on again, and hope you when you.
Oh, that would be interesting if you could actually phase lock it. That's something I would ask for.
But you can't. Another way you can do it is by using a step sequencer, or using a random step sequencer. So then that's why you know that it's always going to happen on the next significant bar division. But then you can only go through the step sequences so that you have this element of either randomness or completely pre-programmed stuff. So then you're forced to choose between steps on a sequence, which are always the same steps, or if it's randomized, you have to kind of tightly control which, like the window of the randomization. So for example, if you wanted to put that to a random step there, you would have to make sure that randomness gets transmuted to the destination parameter in the effects block only in as much as it is within a window which produces musically useful results. And sadly, the patterns available to you, often you have to like travel past ones which are shit, and maybe they're not completely shit, but they're only good for one specific kind of source wave going in. So these patterns, because you can't change them on the fly, and you can't dictate them with like user inputted scripting or anything like that. He did give me the option to do that. He was like, this is like 10 years ago. He was like, if you want to make your own patterns, I can show you that you can just write it out in this script. I forget what the language was. It was like a JSON file or something. He's like, you can write your own patterns. Back then that scared me because coding scared me. It doesn't now. But even that's a shitty way of doing it. So now I've come up with my own ways of doing things like this. and I'm still working on them. But that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to move away from Tornados, because I spent so much time working around that. And I've asked him to change aspects of it, and I may go in again and ask him, but I just kind of feel it's better for me to just like look for other solutions. But in the meantime, it still works okay. So where were we? I was just trying to show that. Let me undo all that. So okay, we've remixed that. It's gone from da ding da da to like da ding da da to like la 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 to like dun 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 ba dun 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 with just 3 modules, which is fucking amazing. But now we can do something really cool. So now, because of this like iterative resampling thing, well, I've got ahead of myself. Because of this signal chain reordering, you can do iterative resampling. So check this out. You can, because this is now sampled and is not letting in any more audio, you can turn these that are before it off and then put them back on again, and you can do this endless chain of resampling all within the plugin. That wasn't very impressive because this was not designed to do it. I can try and design a patch that does it.
No, but I've seen you do that. You've done that where you do this into a transition into like a completely different bass rhythm.
Well, so I tend to do this process not within Turnado. I tend to do this process by taking this iterative resampling thing, taking it out of the out of an output, and then I'll kind of resample it within my own sort of version of this.
Right, pass it through the rig again.
It just goes back through itself, and you get iterative resampling. But this does it all within the plugin. And again, I tend not to use it because, but it is really cool. Like you could do a whole set with like 2 loopers and 1 of these. And like, this is one of the reasons why when I first got my hands on Turnado, I was like, oh my God, this is all I need. But I quickly realized that it is not all you need. Like it has these benefits, but I wanted to do this stuff with something that isn't Turnado because there are restrictions. So I'll show you. I mean, I think that served as a kind of good demonstration of what's at the core of how I use this, why I don't use it, why I do use it. Now, there's one thing that this does, which another thing I'll show you, which is just a kind of general thing, which is really cool. So this is still on the bass channel, and I'll have to show you for this the, what is it, bottom left iPad. There you go. So yeah, bit dark. Sorry about that. Saving up for a 4K camera. But like, so you've got like, I'll lay down a little thing, and that'll serve as a bed. Okay, so there's a beat. Now, if I do something innocuous like... So that's... Yeah, let's transform that. So often what I want to do is like, I want wow to turn into wow, bam. You want to get some envelopes in there, some LFOs in there. You want to get some movement in it. You want to modulate it. You want it to be rhythmical. So given that I was using exclusively Turnado for everything until recently, I was like, well, how can I get the most expressibility out of this? Like, I'm not using the dictator anymore because I want to have like more of a multi-dimensional sort of modulation optionality. What can Turnado provide me in terms of filtering? Well, it's got these kind of inbuilt, what is it called? Filter pattern things. And actually the filter pattern thing has a Beardyman category because all of these filter variations were annoyingly specific and didn't feel like they were this kind of atomic version of what filter patterns should be. So I told him a big list of what they should do, and he put them in. And even then, the varieties of entering into these kind of modulation modes, which are there's sweep speed, then you've got sweep rate, and you've got these like normal, inverse, and smart. And I, to this day, cannot fathom what the systematicity is between them or why they are good. Because, and look, I love Robert from Sugar Bites, and I love Sugar Bites, but like, I don't want to bother him too much. Like, I don't want to be like, no, this is how you should do it. No, like, make another mode that does exactly this. I could have done, but I realized that, like, you can't beg a developer to make their plugin something that they didn't envision it to be in the first place. You can try, but, like, they might just stop returning your calls. So, like, yeah. It would be good if there was a sweep range Beardyman mode rather than normal, inverse, and smart. God knows I should have done that, but I just wanted to develop my own and not rely on developers all the time for like updates and stuff like that. But it's kind of good enough. It served my purposes for a while, but I think there came a point where I was kind of badgering him about this stuff, and then he was kind of pushing back and being like, well, I'm actually working on this synth at the moment, on this drum machine, and I think this is done. And I'm like, okay, fine. I think it was something like that. I can't quite remember. I was talking a decade ago. But like, yeah, so I don't use the filter pattern thing. I use the filter. And what I've done is this. I'll show you what it does first. Let me just delete this fucking dictator. Here you go. So it goes like this. Do you know what? Let me just lay down a single kick. It'll be easier to hear what it's doing. So I don't know if you can hear that, but that's on the offbeat. On every eighth, but on the offbeat. So it's like every eighth, but moved out of phase by 16th. Why is that good? That's good for two reasons. Firstly, so I'll show you what I've got on this XY here, which controls it. So you've got your absolute LFO, sorry, absolute low pass cutoff position. And then you've got this additive aspect, which is that's on the beat. And then the other one. So yeah, so this is the influence of this one, which is a phase locked LFO every eighth on the one, and this is on the and. Sorry. This one. That's on the and, on the one. So then you can do shit like this. And I've messed with it now so I can show you guys the example, but what I had going on in this guitar amp, it wasn't being variated at all. All it was doing was adding a bit of very subtle drive to just get the peaks of that to stick out, which is a kind of way of emulating what you might hear on a nice, tasty analog filter. It's not doing the exact same thing, but it's kind of getting some of the way there. that's what that does. It's quite cool. I made do with that for a good couple of years and enjoyed using it enough that I didn't want to change it. But then I got bored of it, and I suppose I can do another video or series of videos explaining how I've replaced it, because the things I've replaced it with are bananas. But this, as a kind of way of sculpting that kind of stuff, is very cool. Like, that's quite an amazingly expressive tool to have, to be able to have an XY where you just wiggle it around and you can kind of feel, just by the wiggle of a finger, the kind of, rhythm that you're making. I'll show you again. And that echo is just Ableton's echo. It's their kind of like space echo-esque analog delay thing. But yeah, so like, I mean, I was asked before, how do I get Turnado to sound good? Because I get Turnado sounding good. And I would argue that it's not that I'm getting Turnado to sound good. It's just I'm being very, very careful about what I'm asking it to do and how I'm asking it to do it. So like, yeah, because the actual DSP in it is like pretty basic. And the options you have are quite limited. So what would be good, and what I have now in this other non-Turnado related thing that I've built, is that instead of having just these like basic LFO shapes, like saw down, sloped up, saw down, slope down, which these are cool, but you can't change them in real time. It would be good if you could kind of morph between them. You can't. The thing I'm building now can. It would be good if you could make that a really extreme curve. Really kind of exponential. You can't. It would be good if you could smooth it. You can't. The thing that I have now can. So it's like I've been trying to move away from this because I love it, or at least I did for a while. And then I was like, I've got more processing power now because I've got a better computer. Let me move away from it. But like I say, if you want to do this kind of thing, you can. And another great thing about this is that because I'm doing the offbeats with a separate additive LFO component here, you can then use an external control of the phase to slightly offset that to give you swing. And finding an LFO generator that gives you adjustable swing is annoyingly hard. There are some that do, many that don't. You have to bake the swing into the preset, or it doesn't have it at all. But this is cool. So this is the way you do it in Turnado, because it's not built into Turnado. So that's swung, and then I can unswing it. And the only thing I had to do there was change the phase of this, and I've got that working through. It's just a MIDI assignment. Specifically, the way that it's done is it's one of these parameters. It's like whatever it's called. Where is it? Oh, not configure. Bollocks. There you go. So it's phase here. There you go. So that FX8 LFO2 phase, and I've got that mapped to MIDI. So that's quite cool. There are, I mean, I don't know how long this video would be if I went through every single one of these. I think maybe I should make separate videos which are specifically about the foibles of each of these modules, because each one I could spend a good few minutes explaining what the advantages of each of them are. But I feel like this video has already been very long, but I think it has so far covered all of the things which I believe make Turnado particularly unique and having a kind of utility which is hard to find anywhere else. And yeah, it just comes down to incredible CPU performance, banks that can be changed in and out. I've not demonstrated that, but you just send it a program change. And I can do an explainer on that, actually, because it is fairly fiddly to set up. I mean, it's not that fiddly, but it's easy to send it the wrong bank and program change configuration, then it does nothing. But I can do, if anyone wants to, a deep dive on that. It wouldn't be a long video, but that's an instructional video I can make. And also how to set up a bank system within a folder so that the bank changes have like meaning. How to do something which is like a usable program list. You just have to do it alphabetically and be very rigorous about alphabeticizing your presets. Yeah, so that's what makes Turnado special. That's what makes it restricted. It's the incredible ease of use. It looks lovely. Some of the sounds you can get out of it are amazing. Like, I don't know if you heard the quality of that reverb, but it's quite good. I mean, it's a bit metallic, but it's fucking usable. It's really nice. And again, I used to use the reverbs in Turnado exclusively because I just wanted to cut down on CPU usage, and they're quite good. But they're not very adaptable. They're not very lifelike. And there's various aspects of them that you can't change in real time. So, yeah, in terms of a general overview, I think that's this video complete. And that shows, yeah, incredible CPU usage, ability to swap out presets, the modulation system, its advantages and its disadvantages. I haven't gone into detail about lots of these hacks and pro tips for the individual presets yet. I mean, for the individual blocks, yeah, I've done some of them, but I've shown some of the principles that I use to squeeze the most out of Turnado. And so I guess I'll call that a day for this video. But if anyone's got any questions, now is when you can ask them. You can't. Any questions? Is anyone still even fucking listening? Hello? No? I think maybe it's push to talk and nobody realised. Either that or no one has a question.
I'm heading out the door. Otherwise, I'd have tons of questions. But like, I've got to go get a bus. So
Fair enough.
That's sick. I'm going to be rewatching this video as soon as you post it.
Really? Was that useful? Was that like
super useful?
Okay,
yes,
cool.
absolutely.
Oh, good. Okay.
Insanely useful because like Turnado doesn't really give you these details like you've actually analyzed like more specifically what the effects do rather than like if you follow the Turnado manual it kind of gives you a bit but it doesn't it's super useful. There's a lot of pitfalls that I've fallen into that you explicitly like highlight. Yeah, I didn't want to be doing that because it results in these. And I'm like, yeah. It kind of does. Yeah.
I don't know if any of what I've just done is going to be the kind of thing that I can put public facing because it's just not interesting enough to like a wider audience. I think for it to be like, for this to be a video that I could, I think, put out on YouTube, there'd need to be some like wow moment, but I don't think there is. I think this is more like
there might be bits.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, there might be bits
Maybe
that you could cut into it, but yeah, you're right. For YouTube itself, you want more specifically like short form, direct, engaging content, not necessarily
this
as
was
deep.
Not that. Yeah, this was more like
all of this counts,
but this counts for having exclusive content for technical consultants.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, that's what it's for. I think
tip and give something useful on YouTube. And then go, by the way, if you want to learn a whole lot more or like a clip into something like this where you're going really in depth about something, you're like, if that's your jam, come here.
Well, I mean, I can just, knowing that I've done this video, I can just, if I'm doing a stream or something, I can say, look, I've done deep dives specifically about Turnado, come and see them. So maybe it's not like a public-facing YouTube video. Either way, did that satisfy people's questions about Turnado? Is there anything else you want me to cover before I end this? Because I can do deep dives about each individual one of these, because I think what Drifter asked was, can I show like the presets on each individual channel? And I sort of did, but I only got as far as the bass channel, but this has been long. So maybe that is a different video. Maybe I'll do that next, like in a second, get some lunch, and then show another video showing people around in each of my channels and each of the, like, literally what the
makes sense.
do.
Yeah.
I mean, I still...
That way they're separated out.
Yeah. I guess, I'll do that. I'll call this one a day. I'll close this off and then I'll do another one in a second, which will be this little tour of the Tornado presets in the Tron. I think that's good. All right. If anyone's still interested in coming back for that in like 20 minutes, I'll see you there. Okay. Okay. Okay, bye. See you in a minute.
Thank
Okay, bye
you.
bye.